most important event in a series of very interesting events that we try to host in partnership with a lot of institutions and organizations throughout the Roma Week. So we're really delighted to see that this event has received so much interest. And just to say that there are also people that are watching us online, and we are also grateful. This video is going to also be available after the event on the website of the Roma Week, but also on the website of the ERGO Network. So do make use of it. We will also make sure that the Roma Week is going to have its own report so that you can also use it and that we can also use it for our advocacy work. And so with this, let's start this event. So I would like to welcome you not just on behalf of ERGO, but I would also like to welcome you on behalf of the Policy Center, the Center for European Policy Studies, CEPS, because we are both co-organizers in this event. And I would also like to invite you on behalf of the partners organizations of the JEKHIPE project, which are the following. So in the Czech Republic, we have Slovo 21. In Germany, we had, and we still, I think, we are partners with them, Central Council for German, Sinti, and Roma, and the Social Fabric. In Italy, we have the Union of Romani Communities in Italy, or UCRI, and Romni Association. In Romania, we have the Roma Center Amare Romența. In Spain, the Federation of Roma Associations of Catalonia, or FAGIC, and the Romanesi Clovne Association, still in Spain, and Triescodrom in Sweden. And also, as one of the consortium partners, we also have the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture, or ERIAC. So with this event, we really wanted to bring again to your attention what we mean by transitional justice and also what it means for Roma communities more generally. So transitional justice is often understood as a set of processes through which societies attempt to address large-scale or long-standing injustices, not only by acknowledging them, but by responding to them in a structured and meaningful way. This includes elements such as truth-seeking, recognition, remembrance, justice, accountability, reparations, institutional reform, and efforts to rebuild trust and support reconciliation. What is important in the context of anti-Gypsyism is that this is not a closed chapter of the past or just about the past. Rather, it is a historical and structural form of racism whose roots lie in centuries of persecution and exclusion, and whose effects continue, unfortunately, to shape the present. This includes, among others, the legacy of slavery, the Roma Holocaust, forced sterilization, segregation in education and housing, expulsions, and various forms of institutional discrimination and violence, including by police. And on Thursday, we are going to have yet another event, a separate event, that is going to discuss violence, particularly perpetrated by law enforcement. These are not isolated events, but part of a broader pattern that connects past injustice to present inequalities. In this sense, transitional justice for Roma cannot be understood as a one-off process or as something limited to addressing specific historical episodes. It needs to be seen as a broader and ongoing effort, one that examines how the past continues to shape the present and how societies can respond in ways that are both just and transformative. So this is precisely the perspective that has guided the work even of the previous project that happened or has been implemented before this JEKHIPE project, which was called Chachipen. In Romanes it means truth, and the JEKHIPE project, which in Romanes means unity. Chachipen, as the precursor of JEKHIPE, focused on paving the way for a truth and reconciliation process to address anti-Gypsyism in Europe, with a strong emphasis on remembrance, recognition, justice, and trust building. Through research at EU level and in 4 of the current target countries, it helped establish a clear understanding, we hope, on anti-Gypsyism as a systemic and institutional phenomenon, rather than only like a social or cultural issue. JEKHIPE, instead, the current project, has built on the foundation and aim to move one step further by promoting transitional justice approaches more explicitly and by linking research work, policy development, advocacy, and public engagement. Across both projects, we managed to produce a substantive, I think, amazing body of work. And we really urge you to scan the codes, the QR codes that we have placed here to be able to access all of the products that these two projects were able to produce. This includes a wide range of outputs such as national research, policy briefs, infographics, toolkits for civil society organizations, and master classes. Maybe I can have some water. Together, these materials do not only document the persistent historical and contemporary forms of anti-Gypsyism, but also aim to provide practical tools to engage more effectively with civil society, as well as with local and national actors. So in this sense, they are intended not only to analyze the problem, but also to support more concrete and informed pathways towards implementing transitional justice measures in practice. But beyond the output itself, and we said they're numerous and they're very complex, I think it's important to reflect on what this work has tried to achieve more broadly. First, it has contributed to truth by building a stronger and more systemic evidence based on anti-Gypsyism, including data, analysis, and testimonies that help us better understand both historical and ongoing justices. Second, it aimed to advance recognition and remembrance by making visible forms of injustice that have often been marginalized or excluded from national and European narratives, and by emphasizing that Roma history is an integral part of European history. Third, it has sought to connect this work to justice and accountability by asking what it means for states and institutions not only to acknowledge injustice, but to respond to it through concrete measures, including institutional reform, monitoring, and more effective implementation of policies. Fourth, it has opened space for thinking about reconciliation and trust building, understood not only as a symbolic gesture, but as processes that require meaningful participation, institutional responsibility, and long-term commitment. At the same time, one of the key findings emerging from this important body of work is that progress in these areas, unfortunately, remains uneven and in many cases fragile. While important policy frameworks and initiatives have been developed in the past years, both at national and the EU level, their implementation, we know, is often quite limited. Many measures remain at the level of commitment rather than practice. Mechanisms for truth and reconciliation are still underdeveloped or lack independence. And in many contexts, anti-Gypsyism continues to manifest through persistent discrimination, exclusion, and structural inequalities. This suggests that the challenge is no longer one of recognition, but increasingly one of implementation, accountability, and political will. It also highlights the importance of ensuring that Roma voices, experiences, and expertise are not only included, but actively shape these processes through truth-seeking to policy and evaluation. So really today's discussion, it's an opportunity for us to reflect on where we are on this path towards truth, recognition, justice, accountability, and reconciliation, and to consider what is needed to move forward in a more consistent and hopefully effective way. So with that, I'm very pleased to open our discussion and invite our first speaker, which is also online. So if we can connect to Claude Cahn. Claude Cahn is working with the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Regional Office for Europe. And so thank you so much, Claude, for being able to join us online. I know you really wanted to be here, but we are happy to at least be able to have you online. So Claude Cahn has been really closely involved with this conversation since we started the first initial project, which was called Chachipen, and has contributed extensively through his career to work on Roma rights, memory, transitional justice, also within the UN system, but also outside of it. So, Claude, I would like to invite you to have the opening speech. The floor is yours. Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Isabela. And really, it is wonderful to be here. And as you said, I really regret not being there. I only found out at the last minute that I could travel, and then it just wasn't feasible. But I I just opened the program again, and it looks really amazing. So congratulations to ERGO and to everyone who's been involved in organizing. It really looks like a fantastic Roma week this time around. I just want to say briefly three things, I guess. The first one, I'll just say a bit about what we're doing programmatically. So I won't try to summarize all of the United Nations, nor even the Office of the High Commissioner's work on Roma. I'm based in headquarters in the Indigenous Peoples and Minorities section in Geneva with our amazingly under-budgeted resources. I think we've managed to put together something that I'm proud of and is situated straight within this work, which is an online crowdsourced map called the Romani Memory Map for the Americas, which places Romani memory points onto a map of the Americas, and they are points that are placed at the initiative of Romani communities, Romani activists, and others throughout the Americas. The map is a crowdsourced initiative of ourselves, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, with a broad range of institutions, including Gonzaga University, the University of Ethnology of the Czech Academy of Sciences, the Prague Center for Romani Histories, the University of Buenos Aires, the University of São Paulo, the University of Buenos Aires, and two Romani Roma rights organizations, AMSC in Brazil and Calo Chiriclo. And I'm raising it because I hope you have a look. First of all, I think it really is interesting to see. The map, I think, fulfills four important needs. First of all, our work is situated entirely within the struggle against racism. This year is the 25th anniversary of the Durban Declaration of the World Conference Against Racism. It's one of the first major international documents in which the Roma rights movement really made an imprint on international advocacy. There were around 50 Roma activists in Durban, and they had remarkable impact on the outcome document. It still has a number of states' commitments to address racism against Roma. We also follow up in our programmatic work the work of the former UN Special Rapporteur on minority issues, Rita Izak, herself Romani, who it was a 2015 report by her on the situation of Roma worldwide that first put the term anti-Gypsyism into UN and sort of international language. And she herself focused on the need for memorialization and policies to recognize the issues of Roma history and their impact on the present. Secondly, in keeping with the theme of this conference, this for us is a form of memorialization, which is itself a part of transitional justice. The idea of recognizing Roma and recognizing the presence of Roma, both the dark chapters and the positive influences on national histories, societies, and culture, is still itself a work in progress, and I think is part of the work to make Roma visible and make this transitional justice through anti-Gypsyism to enable it. Third, we focus on the Americas because Roma rights activists in the Americas have said to us that they feel left out of the discussion, that the energy is in Europe. The Romani communities of the Americas, many of them have been there for hundreds of years. Many others are there because of the events of the 20th century. We have very small resources, so from from our position, we're able to focus on the Americas while the European institutions with larger means are supportive of the work in Europe. And then finally, this partnership element is key for us. The fact that we're able to work with a range of institutions, academic and civil society, and then hear from Roma who submit points to the map is for us key. The fact that we've been able to do this with almost no money is really something that I think is in these resource-stressed times a lesson. We can always do something. Anybody can always manage to start to do something, and I think, that has been our small contribution from within our small position. That was my first bit. I hope you'll take a look. It's interesting stuff. It's the Romani presence throughout the Americas, something that many people frequently don't think about. The second thing I wanted to say is about the ongoing Kosovo Specialist Chambers case of Hachim Tachi et al. Sorry, the prosecutor versus Hachim Tachi et al. This is a case against 4 people related directly to the ethnic cleansing of Roma from Kosovo in 1999. It has taken 25 years to get the institutional setup and for the prosecutor to bring charges against people. Tachi himself was a very senior official in the Kosovo administration. He is charged with, he and his colleagues, Kadri Veseli, Recep Selimi, and Jakub Krasniqi are charged with persecution, imprisonment, illegal or arbitrary arrest and detention, other inhumane acts or crimes against humanity, cruel treatment or war crimes, torture as a war crime, murder as a crime against humanity, murder as a war crime, and enforced disappearance. The evidence and the material concerns the treatment of the Roma community, the Roma and Ashkali and Egyptian communities in Kosovo during the events of 1999 and 2000 in Kosovo. This is among the most important recognition moments, I think, on the transitional justice for Roma agenda. The case proceedings closed in February. A judgment is expected 90 days after that, so imminently. And if found guilty, it will be the first major prosecution of anyone for those crimes. I hope everyone will follow, and I hope whatever the judgment, guilty or not guilty, you will make it widely known. It has been a long, long road to get there. And the fact that there are now people facing justice for what was the expulsion and of tens of thousands of people coupled with killings, rape, and other acts is a very important moment on the map. And I hope that when the judgment goes live, you will not let it go quietly. So that is the second point. And then finally, I just want to stress what Isabela said. These projects, Chachipen and now JEKHIPE, have been really great and really important for both producing the documentation, as Isabela was referring, but also for focusing on anti-Gypsyism, transitional justice, the continuing legacies of the dark chapters of the past on our societies today. And as such, really, they have brought together, I think, a great group of people and a great, very important set of materials under one project head. And manifestly, they've had and been part of positive changes in society. I mean, we see in a number of countries new memorials for the Holocaust, new structures set up to combat anti-Gypsyism, and moves for governments to take these matters more seriously. I know that there are also quite negative developments. The fact of no Roma in the European Parliament is a serious problem. The fact that many people daily are facing continued exclusion, discrimination, and attack is obviously still of deep concern. But I do think that these projects can be recognized as having made very important contributions, and I hope celebrated as such. They say something about what we can do when we pull together, put our brains together, put our forces together, and try to make positive change. On that, I hand back to Isabela, and I wish everyone a great Roma week. Again, I really wish I was there. Looks fantastic. Wishing everyone a good conference and a great time. Bye.
Thank you very much, Claude. And we truly hope that you can join us here next week. And so those applause were for you. And I really hope we can continue to count on you and the support of your office for the continuation of this work on transitional justice, even beyond the project, because that's the whole idea. These were not intended to be standalone projects. These are intended to start conversations, to put together basis for advocacy work, to create arguments and narratives, and to also try out certain mechanisms that we can further promote them at national level. And so with that, I also want to give the floor now to the second person in the opening remarks, to Manuela Demir-Kariman. She's the head of Pride and Community Outreach of the Roma Institute for Arts and Culture, who is one of the partners in the consortium of the JEKHIPE, and who has contributed extensively in creating an important body of work that, again, we hope you are able to access and use in your work. So with that, Manuela, you have the floor.
Thank you, Isabela. Dear colleagues, partner, guests, thank you for having me today here. My name is Manuela Demir-Kariman, and for those who don't know me, I grew up in Shuto-Rizari, Shutka, the largest Roma municipality, the only place where Romani is the official language, and the place that taught me that actually Roma culture is not something to be preserved behind glass, but something alive, loud, and unapologetically present. And yet, growing up there also meant knowing that the world just outside those streets told a very different story about us. Story that we didn't write, story that we do not recognize, and story that we rarely are giving the space to correct. This tension between the richness of what I knew growing up in that place and what the world knows about us, it's exactly what brought me to this work. And this is exactly what the JEKHIPE project was built to address. On behalf of ERIAC, today I have been asked to present ERIAC contribution. Sorry, can you hear me now? Super. So colleagues will share their contributions, and I will focus on what ERIAC contributed to this project and why it matters. Why is keeping? Okay. So at the beginning, ERIAC made a deliberate choice about what kind of project this will be. And documentation of justice is necessary, but it's not enough. And this is not where we anchor our work. What we brought into the JEKHIPE project is a strategy of resistance, strategy of mobilization, and strategy of political action, deliberate shift from victimization narratives toward agency, toward Roma communities as the author of their own political future. And centered to this strategy is the understanding that art and culture are not decorative and not supplementary. They can be used as active political tools to assert presence, to claim authority, and to refuse the terms that have historically been imposed upon us, and to open space for new imaginaries that institutions alone cannot create. So the question that we ask ourselves is not what happened to Roma, but what have Roma done, what have Roma created, and what Roma resisted, built, and demanded. And this is what we make as visible and politically consequential. So let me walk you through what area contributed more concretely into the key three objectives. On memory. So ERIAC's first contribution was a cultural intervention, and it was deliberate. So December 2024, we opened the Romani Embassy, a retrospective solo exhibition by the Line del Bas at our gallery space in Berlin. Running until the end of March 2025, the exhibition brought together 10 years of Bas work alongside new commissioned pieces. This exhibition draws inspiration from the Aboriginal embassy protest in 1972 as one of the most significant political demonstrations in the last centuries. And this exhibition has the spirit of the Roma across Europe. Through cardboard signs, performative gestures, and mixed media, the work marks the absence visible as much as possible. Over 100 people visited the opening during ERIAC General Assembly. We had an audience of academics, diplomats, artists, and community members. And this work reached audiences beyond the usual Roma activist space, which precisely was the point of the exhibition. In terms of recognition, the premise of the recognition is about who produces the knowledge, who leads the research, and whose intellectual authority is taken seriously. In this regard, ERIAC coordinated a competitive fellowship program that combined 6 national researchers across Germany, Spain, Italy, Romania, Czech Republic, and Sweden to produce original research papers on anti-Gypsyism, Roma civil rights movement, and cultural history in their national context. So these are authors, Roma activists, Roma intellectuals, who have put their own voice, their own work as author of this input. These papers became the foundation for the 6 master classes filmed laterwards. They were not only lectures about Roma for the general audiences. They were Roma scholars speaking in Romani language, in their own national language, on their own terms, designed to place Roma intellectual leadership visible in the public space. For Sweden particularly, we paired an established scholar with a younger Roma researcher, not just to produce the paper, but also to build relationship of mentorship and transmission, because Roma knowledge has to pass forward. We also produced the guidelines for the promotion of Roma identity, history, and culture, practical tools for educators, policymakers, and Roma communities working in cultural institutions. And finally, on the transnational justice objective, since transnational justice requires not only evidence, but also people who will carry this evidence forward, we organized 2-day study visit in Berlin, April 2025. This study visit brought together the representatives of this consortium for an immersive engagement with Roma history, memory, and contemporary resistance in one of the Europe's most significant cities for this history. Participants visited the memorial to the Sinti and Roma victims of National Socialism, a state recognition that took decades of civic rights mobilization to be achieved and continue until today to raise debates about what accountability requires. They engaged, during the study, we engaged with organizations working in the intersection of education, advocacy, and Roma-led cultural production. We heard leading scholars speaking on Roma Holocaust testimony, post-memory, and academic anti-Gypsyism, the structural racism embodied in the very institutions that are meant to produce knowledge. Transnational justice needs also organization and agency behind it. And ERIAC work, the master classes, the exhibition, the study visit, the infographics, and the entire communication strategy was designed to build the conditions for that to happen. And finally, ERIAC had another unique role within the JEKHIPE chain. We were the communication partner for the project, responsible for the branding, for the visual identity, and the design language that gave JEKHIPE a coherent public face across all materials and all partners. The infographics, the visual frameworks, and all the communication guidelines produced by the ERIAC team aim to ensure that the project findings are reaching broader public discourse, but also reaching the community. What I want to leave with this room before the post-event conversations begin is this. So, memory, recognition, and justice are not sequential steps. They are simultaneous obligations. And culture, arts, narrative, Roma-led knowledge production is not the soft dimension of our work. This is foundational to whether the harder structural changes can be actually held. ERIAC work within the JEKHIPE project has been to make this agency narrative visible and to insist that arts and culture are not a decorative edge of this work, but its political core. Because Roma communities have been generating evidence of injustice for generations. The question has never been whether the evidence exists. The question is whether institutions are willing to act on it, and whether Roma are recognized as the agents of that change and not solely as beneficiaries. I grew up knowing the story from both sides, and ERIAC exists to make sure that the right story is the heard-won story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuela, for sharing this important work done by ERIAC. Now we can already move to the first session of this event on evidence from Chachipe and Jekhipe initiatives, which is going to look more in depth and have more analytical reflections, I guess, on the important body of work that the two projects have produced. Which is going to be moderated by my colleague Marko Pecak, who is also the coordinator of the project JEKHIPE. And I would also like to take the opportunity to really thank him for his amazing work, also because this is the last event of the project. And so without you, Marko, I don't think I would have survived the JEKHIPE project. So thank you so much for your work, for your amazing insights, and also for your professionalism. So I give you the floor. Can we also give him a
Thank you, Isabela, for the kind words. It's actually, I think, the partners that really need the recognition. I think without their hard work, this really wouldn't have been possible. That includes ERIAC, SEPS, but especially the national partners who are doing a lot of the work on the ground. And I just want to start off this session kind of highlighting what has already been talked about, kind of giving an overview of what the project is. And in the next 30 minutes, Gwendolyn and I will go through some of the details. And really highlighting the, like Isabela mentioned, the analytical part, but also why the analytical part and the evidence is important. If you want to, the next slide, yep, okay. So first I just want to highlight the scope of the research and what we're going to talk about today. First, there was a project that concluded in 2023, which is the Chachipen project, and then this transitioned into JEKHIPE. What the Chachipen project really focused on was on adopting, creating, and defining the concept of transitional justice in a way to adopt it into the project, but also highlighting the necessity of using a transitional justice approach within achieving genuine Roma inclusion. And it really highlights the argumentative and the evidence that without transitional justice, it will only be tokenized within institutions and societies. And so you can see from the slide with the main approach of the continuity between Chachipen and Jekhipe is going from knowledge to justice, but then at this point, we really need to move to impact. And what you will see from the presentations is we've built the evidence, we've built the argumentative structure, we've conducted all this work, and now it really is time to move to the impact part. So I think, maybe go back actually one more slide. What is really at the heart of transitional justice is the concepts of, actually, sorry, I think I might have gone, yeah, next slide. Yep. So what JEKHIPE has delivered, give a brief overview before I go into some of the details. There were 6 countries involved. In each country, like as mentioned before, we had 6 national research papers and research briefs. These were conducted or managed by SEPs with national researchers. This is separate from what was done by and managed by ERIAC, where there was another 6 researchers conducting evidence building. But I think the separation here is while the research fellowships were focused on evidence, culture, and moving into how those impact today, what the national briefs really focused on is how the transitional justice aspect is really necessary to be incorporated based on the evidence, but how this needs to be incorporated within institutions and policies. And so it's really taking the evidence and embedding it and into the work that is necessary for achieving Roma inclusion. And outside of these 2 research kind of products, we also had more advocacy-focused deliverables that were really focused on developing national-level recommendations. These were created by our national partners, and then infographics and others. And like we mentioned, please go on the website. There's the QR codes, and one to look at those yourselves, but then also to utilize all this information that is out there. Okay, next slide. So what Chachipen really attempted to do was to focus on the definition of transitional justice and creating and advocating for its inclusion within the work of anti-Gypsyism. And these 3 pillars are the right to know, which is like the historical cause of exclusion and oppression and discrimination, and then the right to truth, so the state's duty to remember, preserve, counter denial, but also the right to recognize the past as well, and then a right to justice. And these aren't just conceptual things. These are grounded concepts that are based on the necessity of transitional justice. And so you can see here what we kind of outlined as the key definition, which is that it focuses on the past, that defines the future, and is ultimately concerned with the just pursuit of societal transformation. And I think this is important because what we're not doing is building an evidence of victimhood. This is this is not what transitional justice is. Transitional justice is a process that is relational. So it's between the community that has been oppressed or had a form of suffering and those of the perpetrators. So it is a dialogue. It is a relation-building exercise. And what we see with a lot of political will is actually that there's obfuscation of guilt, right? So when there is a demand for truth or there is a demand for recognition, there's typically a pushback of this recognition. And what this definition attempts to do is to not make it necessarily only about blaming and guilt, but also establishing a relationship process that is in the benefit of societal transformation, with the concepts of bringing justice and bringing truth to to those who have suffered in the past, right? And so I think this is what necessarily needs to be highlighted, because when you look at political will, and we'll go into more detail, this is kind of the defense mechanism that we see when we are making advocacy efforts for Roma inclusion. And so what I also want to highlight is kind of this idea that really came about across all of the different research aspects, and is that the violence, oppression, and injustices is really part of European societies and their identity and in general of who they are. And Roma have known this through intergenerational trauma, have known this through intergenerational experiences, but what this project really aimed to do is to uncover it, document it, and then challenge the dominant narratives within societies, within institutions, within political spaces, and then allow that to enable reconciliation. And as you can see from the slides, it's leading to genuine, real equality and not just token inclusion, what we see a lot of the times in terms of, especially in political spaces when we're doing advocacy. Next slide. I'm going to save this for the last, I think, actually. So next one. I want to go a little bit into the details of here are the research fellowships. And so the area colleague really went into kind of the overview of what those researchers were doing. And here I just want to give a little bit of outline of some of the details. So in Romania, the focus was on actually Prince Stephan Razvan, a man who ruled Moldavia for 5 months in 1595, and whose ethnic origin was systematically erased by Romanian historiography. And the story really is a landmark for Roma identity and a powerful symbol for reconciling 50 years of slavery. And then in Germany, Maria Bogdan documents what is called the second persecution, so the post-1945 failure to recognize Roma as Holocaust victims, and how this translates into future policies within Germany. And then also explores arts as resistance, from survival memoirs to theater production. And then in Italy, Federica Scrimieri, I think I pronounced it out, traces the arc of fascist-era racial laws and the internment post-war camp system and how this is transitioned into current day or modern era policies, especially police registration and so on in Italy. And then specifically also outlines kind of the emergence of kind of new generational archivists who use music, performance, and social media to reclaim the identity. And then in Spain, Fernando Ruiz Molina examines the over 200 anti-Roma laws since 1499 in Spain, also the Great Roundup in 1749, and the role of flamenco in protest as a tool for political memory and Romani agency. And then in Sweden, Jan Schelling and Samantha Selimovic trace the history from racial biology to systemic sterilization laws, and then in the legal police ethnic registration scandal also that happened in 2013. Which also kind of shifted the national discourse, viewing Roma as a problem to recognizing structural anti-Gypsyism as a Swedish problem. And again, a lot of these are online, so please read them. Next slide. Now the country briefs, so these go from not just details of the past, but then to specific aims and calls for action. And so I think, to save time, I will go specifically to those because I think a lot of the historical context was already mentioned in some of the previous research as well. And so, for instance, in Germany, there was a central demand for an independent historical commission on the second persecution alongside constitutional minority protections and of discriminatory police practices. And in Spain, the brief kind of leverages Spain's 2022 democratic memory law to call for a working group on commission and memory reconciliation. And so, yeah, and then specifically on how to build compensation for centuries of anti-Gypsyism. In Romania, the brief calls for educational desegregation, full institutionalization of National Roma Culture Museum, and increased representation in academia. And in Italy, the brief urges a truth and reconciliation process that bridges what is called relational voids and the creation of a national office against anti-Gypsyism. And in the Czech Republic, I'll let Gwendolyn speak about this, but in Sweden, the brief recommends a new Truth Commission focused on policies since 1999 and addresses the ongoing marginalization of Roma in official Holocaust memory politics. Do you want to go back to the slide that I mentioned to skip? Now, I think one thing that all of these kinds of calls to action are, as you can see, relate to is Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. And Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are trying to bring the evidence into outside of simply just political will into an institutionalized process. And I think this, what I'm about to present here is actually from my own research from my PhD, but it highlights the necessity of these Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, and specifically how evidence is not just an academic tool, but used as a way to counter institutional ideologies and norms. And this might get a little bit research heavy, but I just want you to bear with me. So the first quote you can see here is from an MEP in the 7th term. And I won't read the quote, but what you can see is that here Roma are understood as undeserved beneficiaries of the European recognition or European programs, and places non-Roma Europeans as legitimate sufferers and subjects whose European interests need to be prioritized. So basically building a hierarchy within where the EU needs to prioritize its efforts. And then, and this is done through establishing a group hierarchy through a relational process, and this is again why a relational process in transitional justice is needed, by categorizing Roma and non-Roma within these kind of social groups and whose suffering is kind of more deserving to be recognized. And what you see in this argumentative structure is that there's no evidence being presented. This is claimed as self-evident. And why this is important, especially within a European institution, is you can present this as self-evident because it is self-evident within the institution. There is no necessity to argue this, right? And so, and it also displaces a zero-sum game in terms of if we provide efforts, funding, and political will for Roma inclusion, then that diminishes non-Roma or increases non-Roma suffering. So this places in threat to just simply giving inclusion to Roma. Now, I want to highlight Romeo Franz's way of terms of how he presents this topic in the European Parliament. One provides evidence from lived experience, but also evidence, statistical evidence, and then historical evidence. Thus, it makes it clear that it is a counter discourse, that it is a counter ideology to the institution, and then rejects any sort of hierarchy of rights and provides an equal hierarchy in terms of the European efforts and recognition. And that Roma suffering is not just a historical anomaly, but a present-day structural condition that needs to be addressed. And so you can see this argumentative structure, and this is what JEKHIPE is doing. It is building the evidence, has the evidence there, builds the tools for this process through transitional justice, but then brings that and needs to be brought into an institutional space that is actually outside of this political will and is outside of the European Parliament through these institutions such as Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, through outside bodies that are outside of the political institutions that can put pressure. Because if we have politicians and their cycles involved in this, then it won't be sustainable. And this is what we hope with the next kind of panel to discuss in terms of like how we can actually institutionalize this process outside of political will. So with that, I want to give it over to Gwendolyn, who's going to give a little bit more details into the Czech cases and also, yeah, why it's important within in that context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very glad to be here. I would like to thank all of the organizers for putting this week together, and especially the Center for European Policy Studies for making it possible for me to do this research and also present it to you here today. Can we go to the next slide? Hello? Can we go to the next slide? Great, thank you. So what I'm going to be presenting to you today is actually an update to the research that was published last year. You can find that research at antigypsyism.eu, and I apologize for the length, but there is a great deal of information that's out there, and it's important to capture it. I bet the takeaway that I would like you to have is that we don't really have transitional justice mechanisms in place yet in the Czech Republic, although there are cases which definitely meet the criterion of instances for which transitional justice would be advisable. And I'm going to present two case studies today. The first is the compensation process for forced sterilization victims, and the second is the recognition of the Holocaust and its Romani and Sinti victims, the case of Leti and the memorial that now exists. Next slide, please. So, Romani women were targeted for forced sterilization starting in the late 1960s in the former Czechoslovakia, and this has continued to the present, unfortunately, in the Czech Republic and in the successor state of Slovakia into the early 21st century. A compensation mechanism for the Czech Republic only, not for women who were forcibly sterilized in Slovakia, was instituted for the 2022 to 2025 period. It was then extended to end in this coming January. And it covers the period from 1966 to April 2012, which was the time during which the legal framework did not provide sufficient safeguards to prevent forced sterilization or sterilization of women without their informed consent from happening. Despite this work to achieve this compensation process, which was adopted by Parliament and took 20 years, unfortunately, no civil society experts, not Romani ones, not non-Romani ones, nobody who was involved in the drafting of the law and the passing of the law became involved in assessing the complaints to the ministry and the applications for the compensation process. And this has had sad results for the applicants. There have been many more applicants who have been rejected than should have been if their applications would have been understood by somebody who knew the history and understood how to phrase the awarding of compensation in such a way as to reflect the existing state of evidence, which I'll get to. Many of the rejected applicants have had to sue for compensation. This is something they can do that at no cost to them, but it's in the administrative court system, not a civil court system. And during the first phase of the compensation process itself, the Supreme Administrative Court, thankfully, has confirmed that these applications cannot be rejected just because the original medical records are missing. In other words, medical records are kept for only 40 years in the Czech Republic, and the position that many of the people applying were faced with was they tried to access their records and they were told, well, we have a record of the fact that we destroyed your records 40 years ago, or in some cases, even under the 40-year limitation. But we're not going to draw any conclusions from the fact that you actually were here. And so therefore, since there's no evidence, we can't compensate you. And the court has said, no, that argument is wrong. The burden of proof lies with the state, not with the people who are applying for compensation. And the ministry has been told this more than once by the court system, but unfortunately, they are a very slow organization when it comes to learning, and their decision-making does not yet reflect the fact that they should be approaching the assessment of the evidence entirely differently. Could I have the next slide?
So, what is happening in this process? The ministry has pedantically contested every compensation request whenever possible, including by using the option to suspend proceedings for what they call flaws in the applications, which can include something as minor as a missing diacritic mark from the spelling of the name. This has caused secondary victimization. Women who believed that they could present a credible claim are being called upon to present more evidence, some of which may never be ultimately acknowledged by the ministry. The ministry does not make it possible for them, for example, or in the beginning it didn't. Now they are softening a little on this, but in the beginning they required people to go all the way to Prague to give in-person testimony at the ministry, which was not easy for many of these people. They seem to have adopted some sort of flexibility more recently on that. Very sadly, many applicants have passed away. They applied and they have passed away without learning whether they would ever be compensated. And despite civil society asking multiple times, the ministry refuses to give priority to the applicants who are either elderly or terminally ill. And this is part of a larger problem with how the ministry manages or does not manage this process as a whole. They claim to not be able to organize the work in such a way as to see the patterns that are generated by the process. NGOs who have been assisting these applicants also report that to this day, when they go into the hospitals where these sterilizations were performed and try to assist the applicants with accessing their own records, the staff of these hospitals often accost them, deny that the sterilizations were illegal, defend the practice, and this is very difficult, of course, for the civil society people who are helping the people who want to apply. So it's very clear that the lessons of this history are the generation of the societal consensus, which should be the outcome of a transitional justice process, is not happening in the Czech Republic in the very places where these violations were perpetrated, in the places where it's most important. The parliament passed the law. The parliament sees the larger issue. Civil society sees the larger issue. But where it matters most, there is no consensus yet. Can we have the next slide? Thank you. Now I'd like to shift to a different example. And this is reversing of the desecration of the Holocaust site for Roma and Sinti people in Lety u Písku in South Bohemia. There was a concentration camp for Roma and Sinti at Lety during the Protectorate era during the Second World War. During the 1970s, under communist rule, an industrial farm was allowed to overlap the place where that original concentration campsite was. This was a farm for 13,000 pigs, and that's quite a smell if you ever get close to such a large facility. After decades of Romani activism, the Czech state finally bought out the farm in the year 2018. This was an enormous victory for Romani civil society. A new memorial was opened there very recently in 2024, financed mostly by Norway grants, with contributions from Germany and the Czech Culture Ministry. And the process of designing that memorial did involve Romani civil society, including the main people who had advocated for decades for the farm to be moved. However, for some reason, their wishes regarding the placement of the victims' names at the memorial were ignored. There was a whole process by which they were allowed to give feedback, and the only feedback that they gave to the designers was, we do not want the names to be flush with the ground in this walkway. We don't want them on the ground. And the designers of the memorial came back and said, okay, we'll put a barrier there so that no one will step on them. But then when the memorial was finally built, no such barrier was installed. In this case, I have to say that the Czech Cultural Ministry has stayed the course to help Romani civil society achieve what it believes is a dignified version of this memorial. It opened a negotiation process with the relatives of the people who had been imprisoned in Lety on how to correct the fact that, unfortunately, today when you go to the memorial, it is very easy to step on the names if that's what you want to do. It's easy to do it by accident because of the way it's been designed. So a process is underway to adapt the memorial. The fact that this mistake happened is also something that the Czech Cultural Ministry learned from. They have instituted a new oversight board. It reports to the ministry and supports input on how to oversee both the Lety Memorial and the other memorials which are managed by the Museum of Romani Culture, which is a state-sponsored and state-established entity. And the relatives of those imprisoned in the concentration camps do have a voice there. It's a volunteer voice, but it's the voice that they want, and it's much more, it's the most institutionalization of this that we've ever seen. So this is an example of a ministry learning, which I think is one of the aspects of transitional justice is, can the society learn from its history and generate a new consensus about what the common history is? Could we have the next slide? Thank you. So I just want to briefly compare these two cases side by side for you. In the case of the forced sterilization compensation, there is not any consensus still between Romani civil society and the people executing the compensation laws with regard to the facts of the larger picture, the bigger picture, the pattern and practice, as opposed to individual instances of that event. Whereas with the Lety Upisku Memorial, there is a consensus. There is a consensus on the Holocaust in the Czech Republic. There is a consensus that it happened, that it's a fact. People can even be prosecuted for denying that it happened. And so at least we don't have to fight that battle over and over again about the Holocaust. With regard to the forced sterilizations, unfortunately, there still isn't consensus between what Romani civil society expects and what the state expects to do when it comes to the actions that the state should take. Whereas in the case of Lety, consensus has been generated. In the case of forced sterilization, very sadly, there has been no Romani and no other civil society participation in the execution of the law that is supposed to rectify this past wrongdoing. If there had been Romani civil society members able to advise the legal department at the ministry as to how to understand the applications that they were proceeding, hopefully the decisions would have been better, but that option was not afforded to them. Whereas at Lety, Romani civil society participation in the decision-making has become more institutionalized, and this is the Czech Culture Ministry deserves a great deal of recognition for bringing them in and giving them the influence that they do have. Finally, in the case of forced sterilization compensation, it's clear that the state is taking every opportunity that they can to minimize the cost of this to the larger society. Yes, it's pretty clear from the pattern that pay as few people as possible is the unwritten rule of this process. And in the case of the Lety Upisku Memorial, while the state did make an initial investment to remove the farm, remove the pigs, ameliorate the site, get rid of the environmental damage, and make it possible for a memorial to be built there, it still relies too heavily on foreign investment to run it. It's wonderful that Norway grants can bring money to the Czech Republic for these issues, but why should Norway have to do that is my question. Can we have the next slide? These are my conclusions. When seeking to remedy past harms, which is part of transitional justice, Romani civil society must be involved in the state's effort. Whenever they are ignored and left out of the picture, injustices are just compounded. These are two very clear examples of that. And developing consensus as to the meaning of the past requires the building of institutional memory. This is not guarantee, there's no given guarantee that this will happen, and it's very important for Romani people to find their allies in the structures of the state to make sure that this can happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gwendolyn. I think, since we've given an overview and then some specifics, you can see how important this work is, and then also, that this project isn't at all symbolic, and it is really grounded in reality and the community. We are running a little bit short on time, but we did, since we provided a lot of the details about the project over the past 2 years and then the previous project in Chachipen, we wanted to give a little, maybe couple questions if or comments someone wants to add, so that but then we need to transition to the next panel quickly. So if anyone has any couple questions, maybe we can, okay.
I saw 3.
Could I maybe start here?
Mine is more of a comment and an update. So I'm Edlira Maiko from Foundation Erinnerung, Verantwortung, Zukunft, or EVZ, in English, Remembrance, Responsibility, Future in Germany. So I have read all your materials, and I want to commend you for this important body of work. Why I have read them is because maybe, as you have heard, in Germany, we expect this year that the Commissioner Against Anti-Gypsyism of the German government, he appoints a commission for what you also mentioned here, the second persecution for the wrongs done to Sinti and Roma after the Second World War. And how EVZ comes into this picture is that the secretariat for this commission will be based in our foundation. And they start already their work in the beginning of May, in a week, the 2 colleagues. And we also have read the materials also to see from also UCA, the independent commission that was 2019, 2021 in Germany. This is also a recommendation that came from this commission to see what are some, what preparatory work the secretariat can do until the commission comes, so to address some of these challenges. As you also mentioned in the material, the time frame of the commission cannot be forever. It has a time frame, what you can prioritize, what you can do in this time frame. How you involve the community is also very important. So the secretariat will look also at best practices on how to involve civil society organization, how to do the hearings with the community, people who have experienced the period after the Second World War, communication and transparency with the independent. The independent commission even doesn't have its own website. So I think as the secretariat starts its works, the work that you have done will be a basis for them to find ways how this commission, and for us all, we will be looking at this development, how this commission can address some of the challenges that you also mentioned in your research. So thank you very much.
Yeah, just to comment quickly. I mean, first thing is definitely communicate with our national partners who are here also, so definitely do that. They will know the best, especially in terms of like the German context. And then just another thing is, I'm not sure what EVZ's scope is at the moment, but they used to support outside of Germany in terms of a lot of programs related to this topic. So like one ask would actually be to expand in terms of this, in terms of what JEKHIPE and Transitional Justice concepts is trying to do and attempting to do, especially for Romani communities outside of Germany through its programming. Because I think a foundation, I think as credible as this would be actually a strong effort in terms of its outside of Germany.
We are looking also at some also that you are mentioning, and we will also talk to their secretariats, like how they have functioned. So this is also a good source.
I am Delia Grigore the head of the organization Roma Center Amare Romența, one of the partners in the project. For us, it was a big stake, very important, the recognition of Roma slavery. And during the project, everything, national seminars, trainings, advocacy, lobby, everything was around this idea, including using some other project as a complement for organizing an exhibition on Roma slavery and to fight for the museum that will include also Roma slavery and reparations. But what is important as a result of the project is that towards the end, we decided two very important things with the National Agency for Roma and the National Center for Roma Culture, Romano Care, and also with the Ministry of European Investment and Projects together, the Ministry of Education and all the representatives of different institutions, including local, like the school inspectorate from Bucharest and other participants from the school inspectorate from Jalomica and others. We decided two important things: to try to revive or to re-establish what was 15 years ago, something that was not finalized, a national commission on research and on implement reparation, research on slavery with historians and academics, and to establish an action plan that we already have in the project, but to this action plan to become public policy on reparations, very important for us. And reparations are many. We also have, we adopted a proclamation of the Roma Civil Society that became a political declaration of the Roma deputy in the parliament. But you know how it is in Romania. In Romania, I don't know in other countries, sometimes political declarations are not taken into account. They are just put there and they are recorded to be there, but they are not taken into account. That is why another thing is to go in the field, the local authorities, the prefectures and also the local and county councils, to support trainings of the authorities on slavery, that they don't know almost anything about this. And National Agency for Roma will support this. They promised in a public meeting. We hope that we will lobby and advocacy around them in order to keep their promise. On the other side, and this is my last word, with the civil society organizations that participated, and with the activists, individual activists, like Costel Bercuș by me and other colleagues, we decided to sue the Romanian state, to gather funds, to employ a lawyer's house, and to really begin suing for this recognition of the slavery as a crime against humanity, Roma slavery, because what happened is that in the United Nations, Romania, as a state, was against, not against, but they didn't vote, not sustained, yes, saying that, okay, slavery is not a crime against humanity in what concerns Romania. And Romania is one of the perpetrators, and the slavery of the Roma was for 500 years. And it's Romania that was against, actually, the adoption of this, the resolution of the United Nations. So that made us, and other things, but this is the last very big point that made us to prepare suing the Romanian state, because it's the only way. And all the policies, actually, the public policies in Romania, and this I spoke with some ministries that I told you about now, Roma from these ministries, let me be open, is because in these agencies, national agencies, centers and ministries, we have some Roma. It's only where we have some Roma that the responses were positive. Let me be honest, we couldn't convince the non-Roma in the ministries to be with us, only a few, very few. But where Roma are, they said, okay, we will do it. Not suing is a civil society part, but we will do it for this commission and for these trainings and at least to make the society realize what happened, because now it's almost nothing anywhere, not in the schools, not in the museums, not anywhere. And slavery is slavery. It's not only Afro-American slavery, it's not only Jewish slavery during the Egyptian period, it's Roma slavery, 500 years. And this should be recognized, repaired, compensated, and everything that starts from this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just quickly comment on that. This also shows that JEKHIPE wasn't just evidence building, but also supporting organizations like Delia's, who already were doing great work and advocacy and supporting those efforts. There was one more,
Marcela.
maybe.
Can you hear me? Yeah. It is a question for Gwendolyn, and I would like to ask, knowing that there are huge barriers for the Romani women to apply for these compensations. Do you know what is the percentage of the applications from the overall number that were actually approved by the Czech government?
More than 2,500 people have applied. Half of them have been compensated. Some of them are still waiting to hear. They've been waiting, some people, for 3 years to get an answer to their first application, even though the law itself says that the ministry is supposed to turn these around in 60 days. And then there is the issue of proceedings which are suspended, not approved, not denied, but suspended. And when this happens, the people are usually given 15 days to respond and to send in more information, which they may not have. I would say that one positive development was that sort of at the very last minute in that first 3-year period of compensation, the Office of the Government of the Czech Republic instituted a call whereby civil society organizations could apply for money to assist the victims, to spread the word that the compensation process is happening at the time, that it's about to run out, so that, by the end of 2025, if you don't do it now, you won't be able to apply again. Then it was extended, and one of the reasons it was extended was the fact that the people who had applied at the start of the process were applying under a different legal situation than the people who applied by the 3rd year because of those judgments from the court, because the court further specified how the ministry is supposed to assess this evidence. So there are many civil society organizations who have been working with women all over the country. And I have to say that, as painful as the process has been, as disappointing as it's been, I don't think that if we had relied just on individuals figuring out how to sue, that we would have come up with 2,500 cases coming to the courts. So the other important thing about this process is that it generates a knowledge base. If we can access the information that has been collected by the ministry about these claims, we will now know more than we ever have before about the scope of this harm. So that's an outcome that's also positive.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we are running short on time, so we'll close. I just want to quickly transition to the second half of today's event, which, in this first half, we talked about evidence and some of the details around the project. And in the second half, we'll move to those stakeholders from institutions and civil society in terms of how they see this process moving forward of transitional justice within their institutions. So with that, let's invite the second half of maybe everyone can come up as well. So everyone from the rest, I won't name them all, but if your name is on the agenda, please come up now, and then we'll transition to the second half. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Doghi. I'm from Romania, and I'm very pleased to meet you all again. Most of you, old-time friends, but also some new persons, and I'm very happy to make your acquaintance. I'm here also with in our session with two of our colleagues, old-time friends, collaborators as well. Because we have some timing pressure, I will keep it short and pass the floor first to Elżbieta Mirga-Wójtowicz from Dikh Foundation and Center of Migration Research, University of Warsaw. Ella, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I will speak about Poland, and I will try to frame this intervention short through three closely connected perspectives: transnational justice, restorative justice, and anti-Gypsyism. And it will be a little bit historical, but okay. Let me start with the Second World War. On the territory of occupied Poland, Roma were persecuted under Nazi racial laws, imprisoned, deported, and murdered, including Auschwitz-Birkenau. We have young people on here, so I think it's always to repeat that and to know that between 1943, 1944, around to 24,000 Roma passed through the so-called Zigeunerlager, and almost all were killed, including rest 4,300 during its liquidation on the 2nd of August 1945. Many were also murdered locally in forest and rural areas, often in sites that remain still undocumented and unmarked. As a result, the history of Roma Holocaust in Poland is both present and only partially visible in public memory. If we look what happened after the war, we see a clear gap. Roma didn't have institutional representation. They were excluded from reparation processes. Their experience were not recognized as a distinct category of victimhood. In communist Poland, wartime suffering was often framed under the category of Polish citizens, which made it difficult to articulate the specificity of Roma experience. As a result, large-scale violence was not followed by adequate recognition or institutionalization of memory. Restorative justice is not only about compensation, it's also about recognition, dialogue, rebuilding relationship, and restoring dignity. In the Polish case, many of these elements have been weak and delayed when it comes to Roma. Recognitions came late. Poland officially marked 2nd of August as the day of the remembrance of the Roma and Sinti Holocaust only in 2011, and despite commemorations, it remains inadequately present in public awareness and education. If we move to the socialist period, the picture becomes more complex. Roma were subject to settlement policies, but they also gained access to education, employment, and housing. For many families, this meant entering systems that had previously been inaccessible. But at the same time, this inclusion was conditional. It was based on adaptation rather than recognition of Roma identity. After 1985, the transformation brought both new opportunities and new risks. For many Roma, it meant loss of employment, increased economic insecurity, and social marginalization. At the same time, this period was marked by visible forms of anti-Gypsyism, including violent incidents such as pogroms in many Polish cities. It also led to a migration. Many Polish Roma, they left Poland, built lives in other European countries like Germany or UK. In the 2000s, we see another important shift. Poland introduced the program for the integration of Roma community, later continued till today as a program for social and civic integration, creating a relatively stable framework for policy and funding. It supported development of Roma civil society and greater engagement in policy discussions, opening space for participation and representation, but at the same time, structural limits remains, especially in a long-term support for Roma-led initiatives, and these limits became very clear after 24 of February 2022, with the arrival of forced migrants, refugees from Ukraine, including Ukrainian Roma, in particularly vulnerable situations. They face barriers to accommodation and support with documented cases of unequal treatment, discrimination, for example, being refused places that were later offered to non-Roma. Many times the ombudsman intervened in some cases. This shows how anti-Gypsyism operates not only through open hostility, but also through everyday institutional practices. At the same time, Roma organizations played a crucial role, providing support, helping families navigate systems, and mediating with institutions, showing Roma as active agents and not only recipients of aid. If we turn to memory and institutional presence of Roma history in Poland, it remains limited. Public awareness of Roma Holocaust is still relatively low. There are only a few institutions dedicated to Roma history, including exhibition in the District Museum in Tarnów, one of the first in Europe. At the same time, of course, there is a growing engagement with memory, including such initiatives like Dikh happening since 2010 in Poland, and of course organized by JEKHIPE Network, which connects commemoration and education and of course with active participation of young people. A concrete recent development is the 2026. We, as a country, we introduce new education reform, Compass of the Future, and the new core curriculum entering in the force of 1st September 2026 introduced civic education, a project-based format in a broader structural reorganization of schooling. Crucially, the history curriculum now explicitly includes the term Samudaripen and refers to the Holocaust, explicitly naming the extermination of Jews, Roma, and Sinti. This marks a shift from indirect reference to clear recognitions of Roma Holocaust. This reform also strengthens minority education by linking language with identity and culture, by creating space for project-based, community-oriented learning. At the same time, it is important to remain precise. The reform does not explicitly use the term anti-Gypsyism. We are really struggling in Poland with introducing this term. Our government prefers to speak about discrimination, and that's it. However, this reform creates more space for discussing minority rights, diversity, forms of exclusion, particularly through civic education and interdisciplinary learning. Finally, it's also important to recognize the role of culture. In recent years, Roma artists have contributed to shifting public perspectives. A key example is Małgorzata Mirga and her exhibition at the Venice Biennale 2022. Małgorzata represented the Polish pavilion, marking the first time a Roma artist represented Poland, and at the same time, the first time of Roma person represented any national pavilion in the history of
Venice Biennale. The exhibition presented Roma perspective within European art history and reached a wide audience. In the Polish context, this contributed to shift in how Roma are perceived as creators, as interpreters of the history, and as an integral part of contemporary cultural and public life. So to conclude, the history of Roma in Poland is not only a history of exclusion, it's also a history of adaptation, continuity, collective agency. It is history in which many injustices have only been partially addressed. From the perspective of transnational and restorative justice, the key point is not the absence of change, but in fact the change remains uneven, incomplete, and dependent on the specific institutional conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella, for your presentation. I'm very happy to hear of the good developments, few of them, older ones, I know firsthand, and we need this kind of examples, especially coming from countries with a relatively small Roma population, where the will of the government and the activism of the Roma civil society shows that it is possible. Recognition comes slow, indeed. In other countries, situation is not different. I think we just have to keep at it and make a best use of the legal frameworks, policy frameworks, and political frameworks, because transitional justice is something that it's rather new when we speak about Roma. And we still have to learn about how this concept and framework was used by other groups that have been victims of similar repression and historical injustice, and try to see how to best adapt it to the cause of Roma. Thank you. Next, I pass the floor to Stephan Mueller from the Council for German Sinti and Roma.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to present an ongoing project on transitional justice and Roma Ashkelin Egyptians in Kosovo. The Central Council implements together with 3 partner organizations in Kosovo. The next slide, please. Yeah. So briefly setting the frames of what we are doing in the course of the project, we have a couple of activities. We commissioned different kind of research. We intend to produce a memory book. We did already the interviews, but the memory book is still in production. We plan a TV documentary and a documentation center, which has already been established in the meantime in Pristina. We face certain difficulties at the moment due to political circumstances. I will briefly refer to this later, and also to what Claude was saying. I hope he's still around in his remarks at the beginning today. Next slide, please. Why we are doing it? We are now 26 years after the end of the war in Kosovo, and the crimes committed against Roma Ashkelin Egyptians during and particularly after the war are neither persecuted nor recognized in public. And I can even say not even talked about in Kosovo. Another reason is when civil societies or politicians speak about transitional justice, in particular in the Western Balkans, they tend to ignore Roma and related communities, and they talk primarily about the conflicts between Bosniaks, Serbs, Croats, or Albanians, and totally forget the Roma. We see this in Kosovo, we see this in other countries. I can extend it even to Syria or Iraq. Nobody talks about the Domo Arab type people there and what they went through and how the situation is today. Before I continue now with what happened during the war, one remark before that: Kosovo is not anymore the Kosovo after the war. It's a totally different society. We have a very strong and a very excellent civil society, a Roma civil society there, and with Isaac Skenderi representing Voice of Roma Ashkelin Egyptians, we have one of these very, very good civil society organizations, of which I would be happy to see in many other countries too. So what happened to Roma Ashkelin Egyptians during and after the war? Overall, more than 100,000 Roma Ashkelon Egyptians were forcibly expelled or fled, in particular after the war. Around 90 settlements were destroyed or burned down. Other settlements or houses were illegally occupied, in many cases up to today. In some cases were even the municipalities who illegally occupied property or expropriated the persons. Only to give you a rough understanding, in Pristina there were before the war 15 to 20,000 Roma. After the war, directly after the war, this was around 200 to 300. I can give you numbers of many other towns. You have a similar picture there. We should not forget Roma Ashkelon Egyptians were also targeted by the Serb regime. So there were also Roma killed by the Serb regime, or not only later afterwards by Kosovo Albanians. So the majority of the crimes were committed after the war, primarily by Kosovo Albanians. And it is important to emphasize that many of these crimes were committed under the presence of the international community. This violence was justified with the pretext that members of Roma Ashkelon Egyptian communities collaborated with the Serb regime, which is true in individual cases, but individual members of all communities in Kosovo, including the Kosovo Albanians, were collaborating with the Serb regime. The violence committed as a pretext of the collaboration was only committed against Roma Ashkelon Egyptians. So this was a kind of a pretext. In fact, the reason was primarily racism and to a certain extent criminal intentions which fueled the violence. We should not forget that many of the Roma neighborhoods in Kosovo, in particular in the towns, were in the center of town, and these were valuable properties people wanted to get. What happened after the war, Roma Ashkelon Egyptians were not considered being a part of the new Kosovo Albanian nation, and they should leave Kosovo. Kosovo belonged now to the Albanians. And this refers not only to the Kosovo Albanian understanding, this refers also to the understanding of the international community in Kosovo in these days. They would have been happy if they would have get rid of all Roma Ashkelon Egyptians during these days after the war in Kosovo. This mentioned pretext of an alleged collaboration served one purpose. It justified the crimes and made the collaborators, and therefore they were also being responsible of the crimes committed by the Serb regime. And again, I have to emphasize all these crimes are now not present in the public or in any kind of national narrative in Kosovo. Even worse still today, you will find voices who say this violence was justified. Next slide, please. Another kind of injustice, what Roma and Ashkelon Egyptians were faced with in post-war Kosovo was an administrative injustice. And this came primarily from the international community or not from Kosovo Albanian structures. When it came to reconstruction, when it came to return, they were clearly discriminated when it came to the dissemination of money or of construction material in comparison to Serb or Albanian communities. When it comes to employment, they were clearly discriminated again also when it came to the activities of the international community. For example, the European Union was promoting a re-employment program of persons who were formerly employed in socially owned enterprises. As a rule, there were only Albanians and Serbs being employed. It doesn't matter even if in the factory before the war 90% of the employees were Roma. Another justice and an injustice we can find in the law supporting the victims of the war and of the violence during the war. I will mention only one example. It's the law on the status and rights of martyrs, invalids, veterans, members of the Kosovo Liberation Army, sexual violence victims of the war, civilian victims, and the families. So that's the whole title of the war. This law refers only to crimes committed prior to June 20, 1999. So that means Roma Ashkelon Egyptian women who were raped after this date and applied for the status of victims of sexual violence were rejected. They didn't get any compensation or any support. If you are a recognized victim of sexual violence, you receive medical support for free, you can have employment, economic empowerment initiatives, you can participate, you receive a financial compensation or a pension. Romani victims of the war who were raped after 20 June 1999 are excluded from that. And up to now, we are not aware that in any crime of sexual violence against women from these three communities, a perpetrator had been brought to justice in Kosovo. In our research we were doing, we got confirmation for all of this. We even had women who were raped twice, once by the Serb forces and then later by Kosovo Albanians. Another point, there were A lot of other issues when it comes to administrative violence, which I will skip due to the limited time, even when it came to the independence process, Roma, Ashkenazi Egyptians were not considered by the international community. One other thing I would like to mention is a selective remembrance culture, and this would be, I think, already the next slide. Even when Roma were attacked or killed by Serb forces, we have cases where the Kosovo Albanian remembrance culture excludes Roma. I will only mention one case. It was in March 1999. Serb forces committed a massacre on the Green Market in Mitrovica. Several people were killed. A few years after the war, the authorities of Mitrovica built a monument, a memorial for the people killed in the massacre and put the name of all the killed persons on the monument. Not of all. Of the 5-year-old Elżbieta Hasani, a 5-year Romani girl who were killed too, they didn't put on the monument. It was up to a Kosovo Albanian journalist to make this public, and it was quite a scandal at the end, and then they had to put the name afterwards on the monument. But this is the kind of remembrance culture we sometimes face. Back to why we are implementing the project. United Nations, they define transitional justice as to ensure accountability, serve justice, and achieve reconciliation. And we are convinced, our project team, that this is a prerequisite for achieving a full inclusion of Roma, Ashkenazi, and Egyptians as an integral part of Kosovo. Another point, we are convinced that with this approach, or with what happened, and we can provide lessons learned for other war and post-war settings. And here I talk in particular on the situation of Roma in Ukraine, when the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine one day probably will end. And then hopefully international and national decision makers will not repeat the mistakes and the injustice they made and permitted in Kosovo. And if I may add, they did the same mistakes in Bosnia-Herzegovina, they did it in Iraq and Syria when it comes to Roma and related groups. However, not only the decision makers, also the Roma in Ukraine could learn from Kosovo. You have to request your rights. You have to bring up your demands now. For example, the request to fight against anti-Gypsyism, which exists in Ukraine, like in every other country, and not to deny that there is anti-Gypsyism in Ukraine. To fight for that it's not the Roma who have to integrate and to change, but it's the majority who has to change. And when you look to the actual Roma inclusion policies in Ukraine, there's a strong tendency in it that the Roma have to change, but not the majority society. And this fight has to start now, because as Kosovo, Bosnia, and all other countries prove, if you do this after the war, it's too late. The decisions are made before the war ends. Now the plans are being made, how reconstruction looks like, how the society will be built up. And if Roma are not included now, they will not be included after the war. Another point, look also to Kosovo. I mentioned Varaje, but there are many other organizations in Kosovo from the Roma, Ashkenazi, Egyptian community who are extremely strong, who are powerful, and who do not let them bring them down. That, I think, is another lesson the Roma in Ukraine could learn. I have to add something which was not part of what I wanted to say, but when I listened to Claude, who is an old friend, and I highly appreciate his work, I have a little bit of a different opinion what he was saying today and this morning. First, the majority of the crimes committed against Roma, Ashkenazi, and Egyptians are not included in the indictment against Doghi and the others. It's not an issue. There's one concrete case in Libyan from June 1999 which is mentioned in the indictment. Roma are mentioned as a term, but not the individual crimes committed against Roma. Roma who were in detention camps, yes, but not what happened. For example, the burning down of the Mitrovica Wahala, where 8,000 people lived. This was burned down in 2 days. French KFOR was standing next by and watching it. This is not a part of the indictment. And many other killings are not a part of the indictment. And transitional justice is more than a court justice. Yeah, for me, what happens now in The Hague is bringing justice, but it's not a transitional justice which leads to reconciliation. It is absolutely necessary that there will be a decision at court. Many of the crimes were committed under the eyes and under the administration of Kosovo, of the international administration. So it's where the internationals who were responsible for the crimes and not for prosecuting the crimes, and not Kosovo Albanian structures. And the other point is for me, with this trial now against Sochi, what happens after there's a decision by the court? It is very, very difficult to prove the individual responsibility of Sochi and the other people. If they can't prove it, and Sochi will not be sentenced for this, does it mean there were no crimes committed against Roma? And if he will be sent to prison for 42 years, what the prosecutor asked for, what will this mean? There has to be justice. What will this mean for the Roma Ashkelon Egyptians in Kosovo? They are fearing already now that this sentence will be taken. Thank you.
And we thank you also, Stephan, for sharing with us the important work you are doing there. It's true, nowadays there are not many actors who continue to support Roma in Kosovo. I'm just happy that during my work in the OSCE, I was able to work closely with a number of actors there and support their effort. This is tragic, it's traumatic. Many of the families that have fled the war, they never returned. People from Mitrovica, Brahim Music and others are still asking whether we can put again the topic on the table for the discussion, because they never received any reparation, any compensation. And it's true, you said there is justice, and then according to that, those guilty, to the extent possible, will suffer consequences, but that's not transitional justice, because transitional justice requires an essential element, which is recognition and penance. It's also about societal reconciliation, and I'm afraid we are very far from there, but I still believe that the fight, it is worth doing, so that this delayed justice, it's not ending up in being eventually a denied justice for the cause of Roma Ashkali Egyptians in Kosovo. Thank you. And with this, due to the time constraints, unfortunately, we will just flow into the other section, and I will pass the floor to the next moderator for the next panel, Juana. And after that, if time permits, then we will allow for some questions. Thank you very much.
I'll just stay here. Hello, everyone. It's fine. I can stay here. Stay there. Then it's okay. Don't leave us, please. Hello, everyone, from my side as well. Because of time constraints, I will skip the introduction from the moderator, because I think we had quite a bit of framework discussions beforehand. I just want to make a brief comment from the point of view of intergovernmental work, as I represent Roma and Travelers Division of the Council of Europe. I think we must highlight also the fact that JEKHIPE had the initiative of putting together a working group on anti-Gypsyism and transitional justice. And I think this is one of the initiatives that should really be carried on after the project a little bit more and a little bit better, because there is a strong body of evidence and tools that really can be promoted back to the governments through intergovernmental organizations that are part of this working group to ultimately lead to recognition of, for example, Key Remembrance Day, recognition of anti-Gypsyism as a phenomenon, commissions and other accountability tools, because ultimately we need to reach a point where legal and policy frameworks are connected to broader goals of truth, justice, reparation, and prevention. And without any further comments from my side, I would like to pass the floor to Marcela Adamova. She's the Roma team leader from DG Justice European Commission. As DG Justice is also a partner and the funder of JEKHIPE initiative and also coordinates EU Roma strategic framework, it would be interesting to see how how the Commission is funding the initiative of JEKHIPE throughout the project, but also after. Marcela, you have the floor. A microphone. And sorry, I would also like to remind the speakers that we are the disadvantaged panel that speaks last, so we need to keep our interventions short. If you prepared 10 minutes interventions, try to keep it maybe 6.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So again, thank you, Joanna, thank you, ERGO, and it is a great honor for me to speak today on this issue of transitional justice and fight against anti-Gypsyism from the perspective of the European Commission, particularly from the perspective of DG Justice. I also want to extend my congratulations and gratitude to ERGO, ERIAC, and SEPS, and also all national partners involved in JEKHIPE projects for all your efforts and commitment to this important initiative. The JEKHIPE project, which aims to combat anti-Gypsyism and look at the ways to restore justice for Roma people, is fully aligned with our EU policies. I'm talking particularly about three very important policies for Roma. First one is EU Roma strategic framework, which includes fighting and preventing discrimination and anti-Gypsyism as a specific objective, but also cross-cutting priority in each policy area. Very importantly, also the framework acknowledges that discrimination and anti-Gypsyism affects all Roma people, all social groups, not only those who are the most marginalized. And this means that achieving Roma equality is not only about improving the living conditions of those who are the most marginalized, but also about changing attitudes, changing mindsets in the society. So within the Commission, the issue of memory through reconciliation falls within the this specific EU-level objective of fighting and preventing anti-Gypsyism. Another very important document is the Council recommendation, where the Member States actually committed to implement very concrete measures in the Member States to improve the situation of Roma. And from the very long list of the measures, they also committed to raise awareness on anti-Gypsyism, about the Roma culture and history, including commemorating the Roma Holocaust through reconciliation processes in society, including also past injustices such as forced sterilization of Roma women or segregation in education, which, as we know, still exists. Also recently adopted the anti-racism strategy, which tackles racism in the EU at large, also acknowledges the issue of anti-Gypsyism and the need to address it. So just a little bit of background of how we in the Commission work. So since the adoption of the EU Roma strategic framework, almost all member states, with the exception of Malta, adopted their national Roma strategies or set of policy measures which are targeting Roma. And then they report to the European Commission every 2 years on the implementation of these strategies. And here the role of the Commission is to monitor the implementation of these national strategies and give guidance to the member states, to organize exchanges between the member states, to share the experiences and so on. And then every 2 years we also publish a report on the implementation of all national Roma strategies, and the next such report is due by the end of this year. But going back to the issue of anti-Gypsyism, based on the reporting that we receive from the member states, but also from the civil society, there is a quite significant number of countries that took steps to strengthen the recognition and visibility of the issue of anti-Gypsyism. So I will give you just some examples. For instance, in Germany, as some of you know, they appointed the first federal government commissioner against anti-Gypsyism and independent anti-Gypsyism reporting and information center. In Czechia, also improvement, they appointed the first ever commissioner for Roma minority and also the definition of anti-Gypsyism, which is based on the ERA definition. Similarly, also Slovakia adopted the definition of the anti-Roma racism. In Spain, anti-Gypsyism from 2022 is criminalized. There was a subcommittee dedicated, established, which analyzed the public policies and also formulated the strategy against anti-Gypsyism. And based on this process, the formalization of the state pact to fight against anti-Gypsyism was established, which was also ratified by the Spanish Congress. We have also positive examples from Cyprus, where its anti-racist policy, the Code of Conduct Against Racism, also includes a specific definition of anti-Gypsyism. Number of counter-narratives also advance in the member states. So, for instance, in Italy, there was a campaign running, "Don't Call Me a Gypsy," with the national football team. There were some also there is also some positive experience from Latvia, where they produced 10 documentary videos challenging the stereotypes against Roma. Again, going back to Spain, in 2025, they declared, it was declared as the year of Roma people to commemorate 600 years of Roma presence in Spain. For instance, also in Austria, they are planning to build the Central Roma Memorial for Victims of National Socialism, which will be based in Vienna. And we can continue with this promising or positive examples. And I want to talk about them not to negate broader challenges, but to illustrate that the conditions under which progress and change is possible. And basically, these good examples show us that the exclusion is not inevitable. It is produced by certain choices, and therefore it can be undone by different ones. And now, maybe what the Commission is doing in the area of transitional justice, memory, truth, and reconciliation. So first of all, I have to mention funding. Mia's working for DG Justice. I have to mention the Citizenship, Equality, Rights and Values program. I believe some of you are familiar with this program. Each year we publish several calls and legal entities such as NGOs, civil society organizations, they are invited to apply. For instance, the Equal Call supports projects focused on non-discrimination, combating racism, and other forms of intolerance, and it specifically mentions that it's also addressing the issue of anti-Gypsyism. Another interesting call is the Remembrance Call, which also supports projects focused on Holocaust, genocides, including also Roma Holocaust, including the issues concerning the Roma history and so on. And if you want to become the partners of the European Commission, you can also apply for the operating grants framework. I also want to mention another very important initiative, which is a joint initiative between the European Commission and Council of Europe. And this program is called the Roma Memory Program, which is dedicated to the Roma Holocaust Remembrance and Education. Under this project or program, a coalition on Roma Holocaust has been established, which is bringing together institutions, educators, and also Roma communities to encourage that the Roma Holocaust history is included in school curricula, to raise awareness about the Roma history and culture, and also to strengthen commemorative activities, such as the one on the 2nd of August in Auschwitz. This program plays also an important role in preserving and sharing testimonies of Roma Holocaust survivors, ensuring that these stories are heard, they are remembered, and also that they are taught. And very important information, the Commission will continue to support the Roma Memory Project in its second phase. I'm going to skip the information about the events where the Commission participates also to promote the Roma memory, truth and reconciliation. I will mention just one of them, and it is that the Commission every year participates in the Roma Holocaust Memorial event on the 2nd of August. And last but not least, I would also like to mention the video campaign that the Commission launched very recently at the International Roma Day. It is called Roma on Par. For not native speakers, it means Roma on equal footing. The campaign was launched in Slovakia, Romania, and very soon also it will be launched in Bulgaria. And just a little bit of background maybe. I am Roma, and I come from Slovakia, which is a country with a significant Roma population. And according to the data, around half of Roma in my country live integrated within the general population. But this reality of those Roma who live integrated into society, you rarely see in media, or you rarely see in public narratives. So with this video, we wanted to reflect the realities of these people, and also to challenge stereotype that Roma people do not want to work. Of course, we could choose from famous Roma people, but instead we wanted to show ordinary Roma people in the ordinary situations, having ordinary lives. We didn't want to show them as people who are different, but rather people with whom other people can also identify with. And also with this video, we wanted to show that these are also the Roma stories. These are also the European Roma stories. And I believe that some of you had a chance to see this video during the breaks. If not, I believe it will be again screened during the break, so feel free to see it. You can also find it on the YouTube. It's called Roma on Par, and if you have any questions, you feel free to ask me. Unfortunately, we have no time to screen it, so, and I think I will stop here and give the floor back to you.
Thanks a lot, Marcela. It's good to hear how the framework worked to trigger some changes in the specific examples that you picked from member states. It would be interesting to wait for the next assessment report to see how this develop further. It's also important to hear how the European Commission acts not only as a funding of these initiatives on transitional justice, such as JEKHIPE, Chachipen, but also as an advocate and supporter of topics such as anti-Gypsyism and transitional justice. And also thank you for reminding of Roma Memory Joint Program of the European Commission and the Council of Europe. With this in mind, I would like to give the floor now to Mustafa Yakupov. He's the Deputy Director of Anti-Gypsyism Reporting and Information Center from Germany. Mustafa, 5-6 minutes. I will gently cough next to you.
Yeah, 6-7 perhaps, okay. But let's see. Okay, thank you very much. In Germany, we are currently in an important but also sensitive phase when it comes to moving from recognition to accountability. We established a dialogue on the high political level through meetings inside the parliament, but also dialogue with the communities affected by anti-Gypsyism through local focus groups and meetings. As MIA, with the support from the civil society, we managed to get the topic back on the agenda. And with the support of the Commission Against Anti-Gypsyism and the EVZ Foundation, a new commission will start working this year. That was already mentioned. But I would also like to stress that the local dialogue is the most important one when it comes to the recognition and accountability. As many of the truths that we are looking for or happened are at the local level. There are local contexts that need to be understood and worked on. The community itself established their own archives of memory or memory of what happened. And this is a crucial information, an aspect that we need to take into account and take care of. And also an opportunity for the community to claim their rights is to tell their story of what happened. There's a lot of local knowledge and experiences that we need to take into consideration when we're working on truth. Basically, truth is, for example, to understand that many things happened locally, started locally. It didn't start immediately with soldiers and army and concentration camp. It started with the local baker that suddenly stopped providing bread or services to Roma and Jews. Or it started with the teachers that were sending children to concentration camps in collaboration with the SS, with the Gestapo or the SS. Or that it started with the local doctors that were actually harming our communities. So this is very important. The first independent commission on anti-Gypsyism achieved something fundamentally. It made clear that anti-Gypsyism is not just an issue on the margin, but a structural and historical rooted form of racism that continues to shape institutions and the everyday life of Roma and Sinti. It created a shared foundation, both analytically and politically, but recognition is only a beginning. Because if we speak about transitional justice, we also have to speak about truth. And truth is not neutral. Truth is often uncomfortable. And in a political context in which we are working, truth also means confronting costs. Truth means that asking what injustice has actually cost and what it continues to cost. One example, a survivor of the Holocaust, Edward Packowski, after the war, he received 15,000 Deutschmark as compensation. That is one part of the truth. The other part is that he left the Auschwitz camp or the concentration camps with broken legs and lived the rest of his life marked by that violence. Or what happened with Nadir Dedic. He died in a homeless shelter from Croatia. Or what happened also with Raymond Guilherme. And I want to remember these people not as survivors or victims of the Holocaust, but as resistance fighters, because all three of them actually participated in the resistance. Edward was a Polish resistance fighter, Nadir Dedic was a Croatian resistance fighter, and Raymond was a French resistance fighter. So this is the truth. There is more behind it. So what is the truth? Is it the compensation, or is it the damage that can never be repaired? What happened after 1945? This is the questions that we are asking. But 1945 is just a period. There are also things that happened in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 90s. There are many wars in the 2000s, for example. What happens afterwards? What is the truth? We have recognition, let's say, in some sort of form. We have reports. We have strategies. But we are still avoiding the deeper question of what justice actually requires. And this is why a second commission is now coming to Germany. This is because this commission will focus on recognition, responsibility, and the consequences. And this is very important. The first commission tried to answer what anti-Gypsyism is. The next step, or the next responsibility of the second commission, is to address who is responsible, what the consequences are, and how harm is addressed. And this is also where JEKHIPE, or the JEKHIPE project, comes into play and plays a very important role, because it helped us understand anti-Gypsyism not only as a social issue, because most of the time anti-Gypsyism is understood as a social issue, but it also is a historical injustice that requires a structured response. It connects the national experiences we all hear today to a broader European perspective that needs to strengthen the discussion on responsibility and change. And now, coming from the Reporting and Information Center, I know it sounds a bit weird, but the key question today is no longer if we recognize anti-Gypsyism. The real question in this context is whether we are ready to pay the price of addressing it. And that's a political question. Because we have invested a lot in recognition, but we must invest now in the consequences. Otherwise, accountability will remain a promise and not a praxis. And this will, again, disappoint our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mustafa. I think you very well captured the very good closing of JEKHIPE project, which is moving away from recognition, which is partially achieved, I would say, and that we should definitely move on to accountability to make sure this not remains a promise, and that states really need to start facing consequences for actually addressing anti-Gypsyism. I will now give the floor to our next speaker, Ismael Cortés. He's an academic and expert from Spain, and he was recently appointed the director of Instituto de Cultura Gitana. Warm congratulations, Ismael, for this very well-deserved position. And I think from this position you are even more well-placed to comment on, for instance, on how academic research, how cultural institutions can contribute to truth-telling. So please go ahead and take your time to share with us our thoughts. Again, 5-6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Oana. So today I want to talk about democratic memory, history and truth recognition, and the need for a new social and political contract, because I think this is the end of a process of reconciliation. Reconciliation in terms of transitional justice means nothing else than a new social and political contract where those who were victims of history can speak on equal foot than the rest of society. Now, what has been different in Spain if we compare to other successful cases of transitional justice, for example, in South Africa or Argentina? In these two cases, we have two core elements, that is, court trials plus truth commissions. None of them happen in Spain. But still, what has been done in Spain and what can be done? This is what I'm going to address here. It is true that democratic societies, and Spain in particular, increasingly recognize that confronting historical justice is essential for building inclusive futures. And therefore, democratic memory policies, mechanisms designed to acknowledge past abuses, promote truth, and foster reconciliation in the terms of a new political and social contract, play a central role in these processes. However, the effectiveness depends on their ability to influence present-day realities, particularly for marginalized and excluded communities. The Spain's approach to democratic memory and Roma inclusion. So the Spain's democratic memory law in 2022, when I was part of the Spanish parliament, marks a turning point by formally recognizing the persecution of Roma communities and mandating the creation of a working commission on memory and reconciliation that now is due to produce a report. We are really looking forward to it. And this initiative aims to apply principles of truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition. And additionally, we have the National Roma Strategy for Inclusion, Participation, and Equality, which include several chapters on combating anti-Gypsyism. Now, despite these advances, significant challenges remain. The first one is that the Working Commission has faced delays, huge delay, more than 2 years delay by now. Still, we are waiting for the report, and limiting progress in truth and reconciliation processes and mechanisms. It has been created as a top-down mechanism appointed by the State Secretary of Historical Memory. Then policies related to democratic memory are not fully integrated with broader Truth Commission or transitional justice initiatives, and this is what I'm going to tackle here. Plus, the structure of the state in Spain is highly decentralized governance system, and this complicates implementation across regions. So once you have the decision at the level of the state government, you still have to go to the autonomous communities and they to implement it. Then if we apply a comparative perspective from the lessons learned from South Africa, I think this is an interesting exercise. South Africa provides one of the most influential examples on democratic memory through Truth and Reconciliation Commission established after the end of the apartheid. And the aim to uncover truth, acknowledge victims, so it's victim-centered. This is missing in the Commission of Spain, which is more about historical facts without the voices of the victims themselves. and then to promote national reconciliation in the terms, as I said at the beginning, of a new social and political contract, where victims of historical abuses can participate on equal foot with the rest of society. Then key features of the South Africa approach include the public participation and testimony of victims. I think this is the main feature and the success of the South Africa Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Victims were given a central role through public hearings, the publicity, the element of the public narrative, that it is totally missing in the Spanish case because it has been overshadowed in small meetings, closed door. And then the participatory approach that strengthened the legitimacy and fostered societal awareness. After the Truth and Reconciliation process, the entire South African society was aware of the atrocities of the apartheid. Then the institutional independence, it was not created like top-down, like a governmental structure, but rather the opposite, like respected figures, people from the church, people from social activism, politicians, different actors participated there, which given an independence from the government, first of all, and then enhancing credibility, legitimacy, and reducing political interference. If you allow me, I think this is also missing in the case of Germany. And then it was linked to national identity. This is very important. After the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, this historical and transitional justice in South Africa, the country was not the same. They built a new national identity. They built a new social and political contract where those who were the victims of history could participate and create a new constitutions on their own terms. Then the project of building a new country, we can also make a comparison with Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall, or also think about Romania after Ceausescu. But the Roma were missing in both cases. In Romania, in Germany, where they were creating the new political and social terms for the new country, the new identity, the Roma were not in those times. So I think now it's time to review and to revisit history and to have a say in those processes as well. But then the South Africa case also illustrates a limitation. While legal and political truth was recognized, strong socioeconomic inequalities still exist, demonstrated that memory alone cannot resolve structural disparities. When we think, for example, about the lack of land redistribution, that is still a huge issue in South Africa. So it's a paradigm of a good process of historical justice, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but still there are limitations when we do not fully improve the conditions of those who were the victims of history. Now, for Spain, nevertheless, the South African experience highlights the importance of ensuring participation, in our case, of Roma communities in memory processes, that we have to work harder on that, not only experts, but how to include our communities in the process of memory from a political and social perspective, guaranteeing institutional independence of commissions, and then linking memory initiatives to broader social and economic reforms in present times. Then in the case of Argentina, by the way, in the case of South Africa, I highly recommend the movie Invictus that was starring by Morgan Freeman and directed by Clint Eastwood. In the case of Argentina, there is also a very good movie, 1985. It's a historical court drama, so it's all about the court case. And then you can see the power dynamics, how the community participate, and the power of the lawyers as well. So judicial accountability was there in the 80s in Argentina, but then also the institutionalization of memory is still a memory under process in Argentina that has been embedded in public institutions, education systems that I think is missing still. Even in Spain, we have a law that make mandatory, including the curricula, the history of Roma. It has not been implemented, and this is also the huge debate in Germany. After many attempts of recognition, it is still missing the history of Roma and Sinti in the curricula. Then, of course, memorial, museums, and the entire cultural industry. And then the civil society leadership, in the case of Argentina with the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, that they were, and it was an active demand, not only from top down, from institutions or experts, but also the community was asking what happened with our sons, Madres de la Plaza de Mayo. Then the importance of the Argentinian case that suggests how to embed memory in education, and cultural institutions, and even cultural industries, the value of civil society and the need for accountability mechanisms at a judicial level, but also at political level. Therefore, I think that the inclusion of marginalized histories, of course, in education, but also in media and the public discourse is something that we have to work out with our Roma partners, but also with mainstream institutions. Because without these measures, democratic memory risks reinforcing existing power structure. As I say at the beginning, at the end of a process of transitional justice, you have to reform society, but first of all, institutions. Then the issue of...
Sorry, Ismail, just to try to resume in 1 minute, okay? Thank you.
The issue of democratic memory must translate into access to fundamental rights. If it is that not enable access to fundamental rights, this would be a failed process. Then in the case of coming back to Spain, I think it's really key to link memory to justice and reparations, to enhance Roma participation, and to improve policy coordination. We have to be able, of course, memory is an intangible reality, yeah? But we have to make it tangible, and we have even to be able to establish and monitor measurable indicators. Yeah? This is a task that we have to hold ourselves, yeah? How to translate memory in clear indicators so we can see that we are advancing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your critical comments on the Spanish example, and also for the comparative perspective on democratic memory. And with this in mind, I think we can continue with the comparative perspective, because our next speaker is Enya Escheng. Sorry for mispronouncing maybe your name. He's a transitional justice expert from African Union Reference Group on Transitional Justice in Africa.
Thank you very much, Ona, and thank you to the organizers of this engagement, and really for just framing the issues, the conversation that we're having today. I think it's very timely. I have quite a lot of takeaways from this gathering today, even for the work that we do to support transitional justice on the continent of Africa. I've been following the project for a while, since me and Isabela met in Berlin, I think sometime last year. I've been following the JEKHIPE project, and I particularly like the place that you have come to, the necessary shift from recognition of this injustice to a deliberate case for accountability, repair, and structural transformation. This is something that resonates very deeply with us on the continent of Africa. And essentially what I'll try to do with my conversation is just try to frame a bridge between the work that we've been doing and the work that is being done here, and potentially where both parties can benefit from ongoing TJ processes. Again, across the continent of Africa, the transitional justice landscape is evolving from the traditional recognition of civil political rights, enforced disappearances, killings, detentions, and now we're looking at the broader gamut of understanding harm, structural injustices, economic marginalization, land dispossession, exclusion, identity-based discrimination. And in many ways, this mirrors the heart of the work that is being done within the various, at least from what I've heard from all the participants in this room. But really one important thing that the African experience is that it doesn't operate in isolation. It's seated, or it's embedded within a broad framework of evolving legal and institutional architecture. This is particularly important because transitional justice processes are by their very nature time sensitive. So we see that a lot of these conversations, a lot of these TJ processes would emerge sometimes decades after some of these violations have occurred. But again, it's important that you have to put procedures or processes in place that address these violations. And again, the risk with this is that when these processes emerge, they are questions around evidence, political will. We begin to have to deal with the expectations of some of the victims. And the risk, again, that this is often a very episodic, reactive, and ultimately insufficient process to address these rooted structural injustices. Within the African Union framework, there's been a deliberate attempt to kind of mitigate this through complementarity across frameworks. Recall I just mentioned that TJ risks being largely episodic or time-sensitive. In 2019, the African Union Transitional Justice Policy was adopted. This is in stark contrast to the fact that early examples of TJ on the continent will go as far back as 1994, but it took us several years of learning, relearning, and failing to be able to come up with a continental policy to address issues of transitional justice. And the AUTJP, allow me to use that short form, the African Union Transitional Justice Policy, provides a very useful entry point for us here. I argue that, and we argue that it's one of the most progressive frameworks globally because it explicitly recognizes that justice processes must address both historical and structural injustices. And these include, amongst others, socioeconomic exclusion, cultural marginalization, identity-based discrimination. And it places a strong emphasis on the participation of marginalized communities, especially the groups that have suffered this harm. Oftentimes we refer to it as a victim-centered approach to our transitional justice. Again, like I mentioned, this is not a standalone instrument, and it builds and reinforces earlier frameworks like the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, alongside the work of regional mechanisms like the African Commission and the African Court. Together, these frameworks ensure that rights, whether they are civil political rights, whether they are economic or socio-cultural rights, are not treated just merely as historical grievances, but this reflects the aspirations of people and indeed continuing legal obligations. So this is kind of the way that we frame it. And really, it just helps us as the African Union to bridge the gap between past injustice and present-day governance requirements. While these violations may have originated in conflict, land dispossession, exclusion, they are not confined to that era. Several years later, these conversations become very germane, and we must address it. Now, it's important that oftentimes we might have to frame a lot of our interventions as development priorities, because it becomes increasingly very difficult, given the passage of time, for some of these issues for us to categorically or actually bring accountability to our societies. So it's important now that we begin to look at it also through a development mindset. This allows us to, in a way, assuage the expectations of the communities that we ultimately serve. Because the risk is, if we don't do that, I honestly do not see, quite practically, because I work at several levels. I work at the advisory level to the African Union, but I also work with civil society organizations. Oftentimes it's difficult for even the victims themselves to be able to frame what is sufficient enough reparations for them given the passage of time. And we might even argue certain times that, recognition for the harms that they've suffered is not enough. We've seen truth commissions, acknowledgement processes, but where these are not followed by concrete reparative measures, it risks being very tokenistic, as we often like to say. Again, just to cite an example, experiences like South Africa and Syria alone provide us examples of where we just have truth commissions. They set the framework, raise victims' expectations, but when it comes to reparations, it becomes very challenging. And then we see a lot of this several decades later, a lot of the issues that where the costs for a transitional justice process have not entirely been dealt with. We risk re-traumatization. We risk even going back to that early circle of violence. So for these conversations, I think one important point of reflection is that the challenge is not really about how to design TJ processes. If anything, we learn very well from the work that is being done, but it's also how to ensure that these processes are anchored within broader legal and policy systems, right? And that way, we are able to sustain their impact over time. And I think the African experience really just suggests that one way forward is to treat a lot of these issues as discrimination, as exclusion, as socioeconomic marginalization, not only as just exclusive matters for transitional justice, but as ongoing governance and development priorities and imperatives backed by enforceable rights framework. I have a lot to say, but I'll probably just stop there because of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enya. Thank you all the panelists also for adjusting your interventions to the time constraints. And without any further comments, I would like to give the floor and invite her to replace me here in the chair, Lina Vosiliute. She's a senior associate researcher at the Center for Migration, Diversity and Justice for the closing reflections. Housing enthusiasts who have joined us are welcome to hear the closing remarks on transitional justice.
We can see.
Hello and good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the Housing and Energy colleagues. So really whole of the society and whole of the sector's approach we have today. Well, some bridging into today's section on this transitional justice to address anti-Gypsyism. It has shown why this issue or topic was not a pretentious one. When we started back in 2019 looking at the feasibility study on Roma inclusion and anti-Gypsyism and scaling strategies, it was the idea of Soraya Post. That as a side idea, we would slightly explore this kind of experiences of South African, Australian, and Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, and whether and how could it be potentially applied. Back then, it looked a bit like a dream from outside somewhere. However, more we started to think about these issues, we saw how it's actually relevant to the history and addressing Roma history, past recognition, justice, remembrance, reconciliation, and the healing. We spoke back in the day also about this part of coming together and healing. So actually, it's really important, and today's discussion has shown that what is more pretentious is not to think about transitional justice and not addressing Roma experiences, like as we heard from Stephan Mueller in his presentation, how these unlearned histories or mistakes in how justice has been dealt or not dealt with, how bias is embedded in international organizations who are themselves implicit in the crimes, need actually to be addressed in this systemic view in order not to repeat the past. And this has been one of our claims or goals, how not to repeat the past. When we will speak about transitions, for instance, for Ukrainian society, here is whether Roma will be indeed part of this transition. And we really see how Roma should be part and owners of this process. And many of you, and especially with ERIAC's briefs, we saw how these Roma civic movements and mobilizations, how they have been vocal in the past, and what we can learn from those history of mobilizations, and how should be the centerpiece when going forward, and how non-Roma, such as academia, such international organizations that we saw many today, cultural institutions, churches, and others, also including the former perpetrators, could be part of this solution, and how, you know, like, whether these doctors in the Czech hospitals could be part of the solution also, and how we could bring it in those compassionate testimony, truth-telling, truth-seeking, and compassionate addresses of the past. So while we will continue building on this toolbox on transitional justice, with Chachipen, we kind of paved the way, kind of scratched the surface. With Jekhipe, we see that you are going already, have been going already deeper into addressing certain specific aspects, such as civil mobilizations, such as cultural sector involvement, that we really need to go deeper to the essence, transition into what precisely, that we want to transition into a democratic society based on the rule of law, respecting fundamental rights and dignity for all, non-discrimination. However, you know, like how it's possible to do that in current political situation where you have the far right, where any kind of far-right politician or local authority could potentially reject or subvert those claims, and for this kind of to take care and to address those risks. So I think I would just end my little reflection with a very inspiring quote of Eleanor Roosevelt, that future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And I think a lot of dreams and a lot of experiences already have been shared today on how this truth-seeking, truth-finding from African continent, from Spain, from Czechia, Romania, Italy. Yeah, we heard a lot of experiences already have been gathered. There was this idea of commission of commissions, how this could be coordinated from the top, but how parallelly we could pave the process on the ground. So these kind of spontaneous mobilizations could emerge, and on different levels. And we heard from Claude Cahn, who is having more global view. We have colleagues from Council of Europe, you know, that it could be really embedded into different levels and create certain synergies. So with this, I would like to thank everyone for your patience, and we are looking forward for, we'll be doing the final Jekhipe synthetic report with SEPS. And with this, I would like just to thank the organizers, the ERIAC, ERGO, SEPS, and all the national partners involved, and all the speakers of today's sessions and moderators, and big applause for them. Yeah.